So, Asha, were the right-wing influencers who were paid by the Russian government victims?
Eh, it's complicated. I'm Asha Rangappa. I teach national security law at Yale University. I'm a former FBI special agent, and I'm a legal contributor for ABC News.
And I'm Renato Mariotti. I'm a former federal prosecutor, a practicing lawyer, and a legal analyst.
And we're here to help you understand topics that can't be boiled down into a soundbite or tweet. So we had some pretty juicy news, I guess, a couple of days ago when the Justice Department announced that it had indicted 2 Russian nationals for a malign influence operation that they were conducting in the United States, which involved domestic influencers, and then separately seized a number of website domains that were impersonating legitimate news outlets.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting, Asha. It sounded like a hypothetical from like a course you might teach, right, about disinformation.
Yeah, actually, for anyone interested in this topic, my Substack has an online course. It's an online version of the course I teach at Yale about Russian active measures and influence operations, and we go through all of this from the Cold War to the present and how they've adapted.
And I think one thing that was interesting to me is the different approach by the feds this time. In other words, they learned their lesson in 2016. The Obama administration or the Obama Justice Department made a decision not to interfere with what the Russians were doing in the 2016 election, not to let the public know, not to get involved, try to cut that off at the pass and take active steps in the middle of the campaign. And of course, that had an impact one way or the other, right? Okay, it certainly seemed like it may have helped Trump in that election. Here, they are not letting that same thing happen again.
Yeah, so there were a number of things happening in 2016. One is I think that they became aware of the influence operation kind of too late. And it's a complicated issue for the FBI here in the States because when you think back to 2016, even once they figured out that Russia was putting these fake accounts on social media, et cetera, there's not much that the FBI can do at that point. We're not Russia. We're not China. They can't shut it down, right? So as you said, the second option would be to inform the public that this is being done. And I think that the Obama administration made a really, really bad mistake in not allowing that. Just to rewind, James Comey at the time wanted to write an op-ed saying that Russians were trying to interfere, that they were trying to influence hearts and minds. And the Obama administration said no. And whatever you say about James Comey, I think that would have been the right thing to do because I investigated what are called perception management operations by foreign intelligence. That's what this is. And we can unpack that a little bit. But the way that you neutralize it is to expose it. Because only when people know the true source of what they are consuming can they at least have the option of evaluating it more critically. And what happened in 2016 is, people didn't know until after the fact.
Yeah, I've been very critical of James Comey, but even a stop clock is correct twice a day. But I do agree with you. I mean, that was clearly a mistake. I think the most I could say to excuse that decision was that it was a new phenomenon. But you mentioned that they caught it very late in the day in 2016. In a lot of ways, Asha, they caught this fairly late in the day here. I mean, it is September and the election is in November, early November. So it's not like they caught this very early on. And I think those documents are stunning. I mean, when I looked at the affidavit on the duplicate websites charges that you mentioned, the exhibits are these like Russian memos that talk very explicitly about trying to influence the election, and they redact the political parties and the candidates, but it's very obviously to help the Republicans and to get Donald Trump elected because he is, quote, relatively pro-Russia in their
Right.
words.
So their goal here right now is to reduce support, American support for Ukraine. Putin has to win this war, and he knows that the best way he can do that is if Ukraine is not receiving assistance. So that's been a major strategic goal of their disinformation operations for, since they invaded Ukraine. I might push back that they caught this late in the game because it's coming to light late in the game. But I think it's worth pointing out that when it comes to counterintelligence investigations, there are two different goals, right? One is to actually gather intelligence. Like once you know what they're up to, you want to watch them for a little while, figure out exactly what their, MO is. Maybe you figure out who the intelligence operators are. You might want to recruit them. There's a number of things that might happen behind the scenes that are different than in a criminal investigation, because once you lay your cards out on the table, as they have done, the operation stops, right? And the Foreign Intelligence Service is going to start covering its tracks. They're going to deny. In Russia, who knows? They might shoot a couple people so they don't talk. The point is that they have decided that whatever intelligence that they could gain from this is now, they've either gotten it or the interest and exposure outweighs that at this stage. So I suspect that they have been on this for a while. And, since the Mueller investigation, which exposed the 2016 operation, there was also an indictment that was filed in 2018 for a similar kind of thing called Project Lakta, that was being targeting the midterms at that time. Same thing, putting out narratives, etc. What's different here is that it's not just fake accounts and narratives. They created they were creating a content creation company here to put it out.
Yeah, it was remarkable. I think first of all, the influencers. There was a couple of influencers here on that piece, right? It was I think it's Tim Pool and that Benny guy. Two right wingers with very huge followings. Multi-million. I think one is over 2 million, one is over 1 million on YouTube. Very substantial followings. Who are getting a lot of money from the Russians. And then that other operation was essentially creating websites that looked like the Washington Post or Fox News, use their reporters' names, use their trademarks without permission, use their photos of their reporters, but had these articles like, Ukraine sucks, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Which was amazing. And bringing it to light, to get to the point you had made a moment ago, Asha, when this was brought to light, I thought it was very interesting how quickly even the right wingers turned on Poole and Benny, and they were piling on those guys.
Well, this is the whole point, right? They know, that shows you that when people know that it's actually, a Russian influenced operation, that the narrative then gets discredited. And that's why the exposure part is really important. So, one of the things that these two people, they're employees of RT, which is a Russian state, propaganda outlet, formerly known as Russia Today. So RT has, a presence. It was designated as a foreign agent of Russia in 2017 when Mueller was investigating. And at the time, that was a big deal because, the U.S. has generally tried to stay away from, using FARA for media companies because it's not a good look, right? It looks like you're trying to censor or whatever. So the fact that they took that step against RT and Sputnik at the time was a big deal. Under FARA, you qualify as a foreign agent if you are acting at the direction or control of a foreign principal, in this case, a foreign state like Russia. And I believe that for a media organization, I think it has to be like 80% controlled by the foreign principal to fall under FARA. So, they've been aware of what RT has been doing for a while. So these are two employees of RT that then were financing this content creation company in Tennessee. And as you mentioned, some of these right-wing influencers who are pushing out this content. And just as some background, the Foreign Agent Registration Act was created in 1938 to counter Nazi propaganda. And, the goal is that you don't, as long as you need to register, if you're under the direction and control of a foreign principal, you're actually allowed to still say whatever you want. You just have to register with, earlier the State Department, now the Department of Justice, and you have to label your content as coming from, the state that's sponsoring you. So what is actually the crime here is the failure to register, the failure to disclose the source.
That's really interesting. And up top, the question we had asked is like, well, are these folks victims? I find it very interesting here because when you read the affidavits, these folks are getting a lot of money from overseas. At least one of the two influencers did ask, I don't remember, I think it may have been Benny, I don't remember, as like, who is paying for this? Like, who is it? And they send him a fake profile of some like European financier who doesn't exist, like a fake name and so on. And that was enough to satisfy him. I will say that for a lot of folks, like getting paid is the key thing. Digging into the details, it's fair to say these guys were not very diligent. They didn't care that much about where the money was coming from. So, I mean, I would say legally they are technically victims. Like I am sure, in fact, the pool guy was on Twitter saying, hey, I got a victim witness notice from the Justice Department. I'm a victim. I think technically from a legal perspective, they're a victim. I think the way that the average person would think about it, they're not.
Yeah, I don't think they're victims. I mean, they were getting $10 million in funding. That was 90% of the funding of this company that was coming from foreign wire transfers. So, I think there's a certain amount of willful ignorance at best there. And here's the thing, like, I don't think, as I mentioned before, the FBI and the First Amendment are two great tastes that don't go great together. Even if these people were acting willingly, I think because they are media influencers, I don't even think that the Justice Department would go after them because it would raise too many free speech issues. And, it gets very muddled when you start looking at domestic sources. I mean, it's one thing if it's a lobbyist, but if you're actually looking at like a journalist or somebody like that. So what they've done is just pull back the curtain. I don't think these people are victims. If anything, they are what the Russians would call useful idiots. And useful idiots are people who can basically be co-opted unwittingly to parrot what they want you to do. And that's exactly what they're doing.
That's how I view a lot of the folks who are like pro Russia, saying the United States needs to whatever effectively surrender our interest to Russia and all that. I view most of them as in the useful idiot category myself. I think that's actually a valuable nomer or label in this case. I think that's really accurate. From a legal perspective, I would just say that you'd have to essentially, if you're trying to prove that these folks had knowledge, it would be challenged. And like, it would probably be, you use the term willful ignorance. That's exactly what the theory would have to be, that they were essentially ostriches. There's actually a a legal instruction called the
Willful
ostrich.
blindness.
Yeah, willful blindness.
Yeah.
Ostrich instruction. It always is. It's usually wheeled out by prosecutors when their case sucks, and they don't have anything else. But in this case, that's what you'd have to do. I think that these guys, candidly, I think it was negligence, gross negligence. In other words, they didn't give a crap, really. I think they would have taken money from anybody to say whatever. And if somebody's offering them millions of dollars to whatever, I think they probably would have taken Chinese money or whoever.
What I think is interesting at this point with the, far right wing of the Republican Party, or whatever is now actually the mainstream wing of the Republican Party, is a phenomenon that's called convergence, which is, it's really hard to tell at this stage whether the talking points are organic to the Republican Party or if they're being influenced. In other words, the interests have merged. This whole the divide and conquer approach, which has basically been adopted by MAGA, is exactly what Russia wants to do. And so, there may be strategic political reasons that these people want to push these narratives, but they happen to jive exactly with what Russia wants to do. I will say that when you look at, some of those talking points that Russia wanted to make sure that these influencers put out, it's basically a list of exactly what JD Vance says in every single interview that he does. So again, coincidence, you decide, but we're at a point now where Russia doesn't even have to actually do that much to push its own narratives, because they've converged with some of the political narratives that have emerged organically under Donald Trump.
Yeah, I actually think in the case of these influencers, I'm not even sure that they got their money's worth. In other words, it may be that a lot of they would have pushed some of the same ideas without that massive expenditure. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I think that's one of the challenging things. It's similarly challenging when people talk about campaign finance issues. Like, is this person have a position on an issue because they're getting all this money, or is it just that they already have this issue and that's the reason they're getting the money? Is, they want to make sure that the people who have their positions win. Here, in any event, I mean, I think what we can be glad about is that I think the federal government is learn from its lesson from last time, and at least now that this is in the light of day, one thing that I was glad to see is people piling on these folks and them distancing themselves from this, as opposed to saying, no, this is great, getting money from Russia is great. I was actually concerned that might be the response.
Yeah, and I would just say that the real victims here are Americans who consumed this content the same way the Americans who got who were micro-targeted by Russia back in 2016, which, by the way, were mostly Black Americans who are being encouraged not to vote or to vote for third parties. So they're being manipulated. And basically this indictment says that the company that Russia was funneling this money to posted nearly 2,000 videos that have garnered more than 16 million views on YouTube alone. And they were also pushing things through TikTok, Instagram, X. So, there are a lot of people who consume this content. And I think the thing that we need, I think they're the victims. And I think also for us as a society, it becomes very hard to undo beliefs. Like once someone has already consumed something and believed it to be legitimate, undoing that is a lot harder. So that's why the exposure is really, really important, so that people know, if they start quoting whatever Tim Pool or Benny what's his name, they know exactly what they're putting out there.
Absolutely. So, Asha, we did have some legal news just yesterday in a case that you and I haven't talked a lot about recently. This was the Hunter Biden, I believe it was California indictment. He had
The
he had
money
two different.
laundering one, right?
Or it was a tax
Tax.
failure to pay
Yeah.
taxes, and essentially, it wasn't for like tax fraud. It was more for failing to pay
Non-payment,
taxes,
right? Yeah.
right? Non-payment of taxes, um,
Which he subsequently paid.
which he subsequently paid. And it was interesting because what happened was in Delaware, they had a similar, it was like a very tough, right? He filled out a form and didn't say he was a drug addict, even though in his books he admitted he was addicted to drugs at that time. There he went to trial. Ultimately, we thought maybe there's a chance you'd have a hung jury there, and they ended up getting, despite a lengthy deliberation, they ended up convicting him. Here in California, people thought, okay, you're going to have a similar kind of trial where, of course, he didn't pay the taxes, but he's going to try to hope for some sympathy from the jury, because most people in this situation just get a letter from the IRS and some interest and penalties. They don't get a criminal indictment. But it was very interesting. And the eve of trial, he tried to do something called an Alford plea. That was rejected, and then he ultimately pled guilty, which was, I think, an interesting turn of events.
So what's an Alford plea?
So an Alford plea is where you say, I maintain my innocence. I believe I'm innocent of the charges, but I concede that the evidence the government has is sufficient to prove all the elements beyond a reasonable doubt. And in certain circumstances that can work. Like, for example, you may believe that the government has a wrong view of the law, or certain law is unconstitutional. That's one situation. Another situation is you think that at trial the jury's going to be influenced or focus on certain piece of evidence, but you think that you still want to maintain or believe that you didn't have a requisite mental state or intent or something. So it can happen. It's very, very, very rare. And the government and the judge generally have to agree to it. So the judge has to take a look at it and understand, okay, how are we going through the mental gymnastics to get there? Because we have to meet all the elements and so forth. And then generally the Justice Department frowns on them and rarely agrees to them, but it can in a certain circumstance. And, it is in everyone's interest, usually, if someone's going to plead guilty in any way, to not have a trial. The downside of an Alford plea, often for a defendant, is the judge isn't going to hold them. Not only, it's going to hold them accountable for not taking responsibility for their actions, fully taking responsibility for their actions.
So is that different than a nolo contendere plea?
Yeah, and nolo contendere, I don't even know if that you could do that in federal court. Like I know,
but is that basically the federal equivalent?
Essentially,
of that?
Yeah, it's essentially
like a no contest.
Yeah, it's essentially like, look, I believe I'm innocent and I'm maintaining my innocence, but you got me on the law. Here, it doesn't really fit because he's not contesting the fact that he didn't pay taxes on time. Like, you can't contest it. I think he thinks it's an unjust prosecution and it's an abuse of power. I mean, I will say that is, I think there's something to what he's saying there. In addition to that, I would also say that there are lots of abuses of power or bad judgments that prosecutors make in a variety of cases, but you often have very limited means of dealing with that. And so I actually think the judge and the prosecution were right here to reject an Alford plea. I don't think this is a case for an Alford plea. It's factually, there's no real issue here. The issue is just he's got to admit to doing it, and he did in the end of the day.
So now he's basically neutralized. I mean, at this point, I don't know that Republicans really care about Hunter Biden anymore because they can't weaponize it anymore.
Yeah, I think
Speaking of information warfare.
But actually, Asha, it's interesting. By the way, when you looked at those Russian documents, to tie this to our last segment, one of the stated goals, was to get Biden's approval under certain metrics, under certain percentages. But I do think that there's an element, another point that you made that I thought was right on the money is that people have trouble changing views that they've already accepted. I know when I'm as a trial lawyer, I'm always thinking that way. I have to make sure the jury hasn't already made up their minds about certain things. And it's certainly in a negotiation that's important. And here, I think that a lot of the Republicans are fixated on Biden. It's actually created a problem for them in the election because they need to change focus. But Trump's still focused on Biden, and a lot of the Republican base is still focused on Biden. I mean, Hunter Biden got that plea got a lot of coverage on Fox News, even though it's more or less a sideshow at this point for everybody. I actually think Hunter Biden team's hoping for a pardon. I really do. Even though the White House says there's going to be no pardon in January 2025, is there really going to be no pardon for this guy?
Well, I mean, that's such a great question, too, because Biden said that there would be no pardon when he was running for president.
The White House spokesperson reiterated it yesterday. But
they did? Okay.
After the election, though, do you really think,
what are they going to do?
Right. Win or lose. I mean, whether Harris wins or if Harris loses, I just think, in the end of the day, when Biden was making a decision about whether to stay in the race, Hunter Biden was part of that inner circle. Very hard for me to see that he's not going to help his son out here. Here, another thing is just say he commutes any sentence. Mm-hmm. Any sentence of imprisonment. I think it'd be interesting to see if he could do that prospectively. That's another thing. I said no pardon. I didn't say no commutation.
Yeah.
Something like that.
You're saying, can you commute a sentence that actually hasn't gone through sentencing?
Right. So you can definitely do a prospective pardon.
Yeah.
Jimmy Carter did that for everybody who draft dodged.
Right.
But can you do a prospective commutation? I don't know. So, Asha, before we go, I noticed last time you got a new haircut. It's a very different look for you. I love it.
Thank you. It's sort of, it's a long bob, sort of flippy. I'm just trying to shake things up. My boyfriend and I broke up. My son went away to college. Like, I'm kind of in transition. So I'm turning 50 in 2 months.
Whoa.
Yeah. So I was like, all right, I'm going to just go chop my hair off. But yeah, I just wanted something fun and cute.
Yeah, it is. I mean, you say chop your hair off, but it's not like a pixie cut. It's still like you've got a lot of volume there.
Yeah. No, and I feel good. Like, it helped kind of make me feel rejuvenated.
So you always look very fabulous. Is this like, do you put like a lot of effort and thought into your look, in particular your hair?
So actually, I'm really happy with this haircut because it actually adds like a lot of style, because I don't actually spend a lot of time on my hair.
Okay.
It's just, I don't know. I got 99 problems, and spending
my hair ain't one.
My hair ain't one. So this is, I'm happy that this particular cut kind of does a lot of the work for me. I try to have some style with my clothes, for example, and accessories. What about you?
I'm a low style person. We've talked about that in the past, but particularly since I started having a beard, that suddenly I have had to put a lot more effort into my appearance. So I actually go to a barber every week.
Oh my God.
Every week. And I get a haircut like once a month, but like every week I get my beard trimmed. I get like a straight razor shave. I've been trying to do better about taking care of my hair, my skin, and so forth. I never washed my skin or put moisturizer on, did anything. So I'm trying, but it's baby steps for me.
I mean, that's a lot of maintenance for a guy.
Oh my God.
The beard thing.
It is.
I mean, that's more often than I get a manicure. I mean,
Yeah, I think that the thing is, when I didn't get it done regularly, like I look like a mountain man or something. I feel like it looks really good when it's clean. This is the most unclean it looks. So I usually go Saturdays. And I think it's great if it looks like it's clean and really well, like kind of recently done. But if I go 2-3 weeks, like I grow a beard really fast. I just look like I just came from the mountains or cave or something.
So, okay, full disclosure. Do you do anything with your eyebrows?
I don't, but the barber guy will do stuff. Like, does that make sense? Like, I had in the past like done a little bit with my eyebrows, but I was like, I hated doing it. I'm just like not a high maintenance kind of person in terms of my appearance. But now when I go and I'm doing whatever ever else they do stuff with. I think they do stuff with my eyebrows too.
Okay. I get my eyebrows threaded.
Ooh, that's fancy. Well, they look great. So
yeah. Threading, I mean, for anyone listening, particularly the women, threading is far superior to waxing or tweezing. It's very precise, especially if you go to the Indian ladies. And they shape your eyebrows very nicely.
Is it less painful than waxing?
No, it's pretty painful.
Okay.
But it's very precise, and you just get a very nice shape.
Yeah, I can tell. And no pain, no gain.
No pain, no gain.